Hello, SOAS. Greetings from Cambridge, Massachusetts. My name is Sophia Aidid. Some of you may already know me as the person at the epicenter of the storm that is Adon Studies. But it's become so much bigger than that and truly a collective effort at activism, consciousness raising, critique, and I think this event tonight is testament to that. So I just wanted to say how thrilled I am that Decolonizing Our Minds and the SOAS Somali Society have teamed up to bring you this event. I have a bunch of names to give shout outs to. Fatima, who reached out to me on Facebook and invited me to record this message. Huda, who's had amazing tweets, and you can check out her Twitter. Yusuf, Rasub, Halima, Mohammed, and Mohammed. Kafia and Delia, who's also given her support. So I think I'll just pause here and let you all give them a round of applause for bringing you this panel tonight. So why Adon Studies? So that's an important question, and the hashtag emerged when I first noticed a journal called the Somaliland Journal of African Studies, a new journal that claimed to have been launched in collaboration with the University of Hargeisa in Somaliland. But once you look at their editors, their authors, their international advisory board, it's clear, and it was evident that no Somalis were actually part of the process. No Somalis were represented in the journal. And I took to Facebook and I let my Facebook friends know and to share that we would use this hashtag to think about how Somalis are marginalized from scholarship about them. And it really exploded when a German anthropologist by the name of Marcus Huna, who was part of the International Advisory Board, made some incredibly patronizing and offensive remarks about Somalis. So the hashtag itself, I think, does a lot of analytical work. It's an intervention. It treats the words of one anthropologist and one academic journal's exclusions not as isolated events, but as signifiers. And I think that's where it becomes useful, as signifiers for a much bigger problem, that is the ways in which non-Somali dominance is sustained in the field of Somali studies. And as well as, Somalis being marginalized in academic discourse about them. And then finally, one thing that I also wanted to highlight in doing this is to think a little bit about how Somali studies itself is trapped within a colonial imaginary that is what basically gave rise to Somali studies as an academic field. I just wrote earlier this week a piece for the New Inquiry, which kind of teases out that history. Many of you are familiar with I. M. Lewis. I. M. Lewis, of course, was an anthropologist who's done a lot of interesting work and, important in that respect, but also a dinosaur of his time. He's someone who started doing research in British Somaliland. Anthropology, we know its history and how it's been twinned with the colonial project. Colonialism enabled that sort of research. And something I wanted to think a little bit more about is how Somali studies itself has never quite decolonized, despite the fact that the Somali regions have become independent since. So the importance of all of this, I think, and what this shows is that not only is there a Somali public that researchers are now accountable to, it's been terrific to just see that so many people are now aware of Somali studies as an academic field and discourse, feel invested in the information that's produced about them, something that was in complete, I think, rejection of what Marcus Huna said when he said Somalis are not interested in scholarship. It's clear that we are and have something at stake in all of this. And I think it has been truly something of a paradigm shift, I think. Not only have we seen young Somali scholars and researchers entering the discourse, but I think we're shaping it and transforming it in fundamental ways. So, now the field has had to grapple with all this, and it's something that we're continuing to think about as we move forward, what the next steps are. I will be tuning in to see what all of you have to say as well, but things that I'm thinking about in the future is perhaps an academic journal, to think more critically about knowledge production in Somali studies, as well as a conference perhaps. I do have Harvard University interested in possibly hosting one on reimagining Somali studies next year. So all of these things as we move forward and fully flesh out a critique and an intervention and a new way of producing scholarship and research on Somali studies. So I think that is it for me on Adon Studies. I was also asked to comment a little bit about what I do. So I am at Harvard and I'm a third year PhD student in the history department. North American PhDs are so much longer than the ones in Europe. Rather than the 3 years, ours are closer to 6, 7, sometimes more. So I'm pre-dissertation at this point. I'm teaching here at the moment. I'm teaching a course called The History of Sexuality. I am post-comprehensive exams. We have exams as well. And I'm just about to head off for fieldwork, and I'll be in London doing research at the British Archives at Kew and the British Library this summer. After that, I'll be heading to Ethiopia for fieldwork. I research Somali nationalism and its interaction with the Ethiopian state between 1943, which is when the first Somali anti-colonial nationalist organizations first emerged, until 1988, which is when Siad Barre and Mengistu Haile Mariam signed their treaty ending the Ogaden War. So what I try and do is trace the greater Somalia imaginary. Really how Somalis during those years imagined different possibilities, articulated completely different geographies for the Horn of Africa, and I try and think about the meanings of those and the contradictions and issues really at stake in all of that, and I trace that from its first emergence during the colonial period as an anti-colonial project through to really its demise with the end of the state. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful discussion. I am so proud and excited that this discussion is taking place at SOAS. We have a panel coming up in Toronto at York University on May 2nd, which I'll be able to make it to. And I hope really this is the beginning of a paradigm shift in the field, more Somalis participating and claiming their stake in all of this and in academic production about them. Enjoy, and really I'm really excited to be part of this, and thank you again for hosting this. Take care.
Hi everyone, my name is Hao Mire. I just wanted to first of all start by saying thank you so much for asking me to speak as part of this. This is pre-recorded, so I'm pretty sure by this point I'll have edited out any mistakes or anything that might look silly. I wanted to say that an event like this is incredible. I think Adon Studies, started by Sophia, is such a fabulous hashtag, and it's kind of exploded and gone into a number of different spaces, and that's what we should be doing, I think, as Somalis invested in our own forms of knowledge production and storytelling. We should be centering ourselves in the work that we do always. There are a couple of questions that Fatima posed to me that I really wanted to answer. Why is this conversation important? Why isn't it important? For me, Somali Nimo is really crucial to the work that I'm doing and who I am, and so this work and these conversations are always important because of that, because of who I am, because of where I situate myself. The broader conversations around decolonizing knowledge production is critical. We're no longer in a space or a time anymore where we can afford to allow other people to create modes of knowledge production that we're then restricted from accessing or participating as part of. It's really important for me and other Somali activists and academics to continue these kinds of conversation about Adon studies, specifically because of the position I think I can speak for myself that I hold. I'm a first year's master's student at the Faculty of Environmental Studies at York University, and before that I spent a decade doing community work, and I could see the gap between what was happening in academia and what was happening on the ground, and I could see academics coming in, theorizing, researching, and looking at Somali folks and not doing anything that honored the work that Somalis themselves were doing every day as part of their own survival. So I think for myself, now when I say the academy and I say the institution, I'm absolutely implicated in what that means. This is now the place where I sit, and I sit really comfortably. So my work is to do the bridging, is to make sure that everything that I'm doing within an academic framework also makes sense on the ground. And the things on the ground start to become relatable and translatable to the academy. So that's the work that I'm engaged in doing, and I think all of us have different work, have different places where our work is the most valued, and it's up to us to figure out where we can do the most for our own communities, or if really that's the work that we want to be doing. And I'm also a storyteller. I tell stories, I write stories. I've had quite a number of them published. And all of my storytelling comes from the stories that my mother and my grandmother and my aunts and my father and my grandfather would tell me. These are critical and crucial stories. And everything that I do, the rhythm, the ways that I speak, the stories out loud, the ways that I write them, in the back of my head, they're being told to me in Somali, and I can remember the intonations, and I can remember the way my grandmother's mouth moved as she said it. And so when we talk about things like storytelling in the midst of these conversations, it's really, really crucial, because storytelling and orality is Somali knowledge production, right? It has been for a huge amount of time. There's histories that we still know that are carried as part of our stories that have never been theorized or documented or placed into the academy. There are stories in the academy that when I yank out and demonstrate and show to elders, they laugh and say, who wrote such foolish things about us? Why does this exist? So stories become the place from which we can challenge knowledge production, and we can revision and reframe a knowledge production that suits us in the ways that we work, without also being homogenous about it. What suits me as a particular type of storytelling might not suit somebody else, but there are similarities and patterns and trends in Somali storytelling in and of itself that I think it's important that we're constantly paying attention to as well. And as I speak to it, I think about two: stories hold power, and stories might be the way that we walk, but they also demonstrate for us who held power and who doesn't hold power, and they help us get through the tricky bits internally, because my focus always comes back to what I'm working on within a Somali community. They help us internally to figure out the places where we're fragmented, and the places of healing, and the places that of potential and possibility. And I think that's where we haven't gone yet in terms of Somali storytelling in the academy. We've definitely always been there and sit there very often within our own orality, but those are spaces we haven't gone to yet. I know this is really short, it's about 5 minutes. I'm also trying to hustle out the door and head to Montreal to visit my beautiful, adorable little nephew for the weekend. So I wanted to at least put this video together, and I wanted to at least highlight and stress that Adon Studies, isn't about one person creating a hashtag to start a movement. It's really about what we do from here. It's really about how all of us, in all the varied ways that we have connections and access and mobility, connect to make sure that we all feel like we're part of a much larger conversation. And Adon Studies, let's also not get confused, isn't about particular people or particular statements, inflammatory, derogatory, and incredibly racist statements made by individuals, because those statements will be made time and time again. There's nothing new in those statements. They don't tell us anything different about the world that we live. Adon Studies now I see as a potential space of resurgence and uprising for Somalis in the academy and outside of the academy that want to theorize about what it feels like to live their lives in their own skin. And I can think of Black feminist thought as having also sat in a similar place, and a number of other movements I'm sure other people can think of just off the top of their heads. And so I really want to encourage folks from across the screen, from across the waters, to really think about what their role is in a movement like this, and how we continue to extend and move past the boundaries of what it means to be Somali and what it means to be engaged in any kind of work with Somalis and Somali communities. And before I go, I really want to shout out, I had the pleasure of meeting Falmo in Wales just last year, and so pleased always to see her name and her organizing in any of this work. Huda, Yusuf Musa, Asab, Halimo, Mohammed Abdullahi, Mohammed Musa, and Kafia Kadir, for all of their hard work in putting an event like this together, and all of you for coming out and seeing the necessity and need in doing this kind of work long term. Feel free to connect with me. Social media is my baby. Twitter at HYMire, or Mire, HYMIRE, and Facebook. I'd love to, if you have any other questions, if you want to connect with me about anything else that I've said, feel free to holler. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Things that we're talking about, like Somali knowledge production, us knowing that we produce knowledge, knowing that as Somali people we have ideas, cosmologies, ways of seeing the world that we live in, and yet we live in a world that doesn't accept that way of knowing as being knowledge. And rather than being that about us as Somalis, we don't write our things down, we don't do these things, that's why we're not enough. Understanding that the world as and there are people throughout the world that have been theorizing, why is it that consistently, when we think about knowledge, it is sort of from a liberal, Cartesian, European, rational perspective. Like there are ways of knowing the world that are considered to be universal. There are syllabuses, and there are scholars that are, learned whether or not you're in Shanghai or in Australia, or even the words like places such as Australia, sort of the places such as the US. But there are these places, and we have these narratives that said they were discovered, or that Australia was terra nullius. Like, it's a big elephant in the room called European colonialism, and it spread its evil filth across the world, and to this day we're living with these concepts. So I want to put that out there, but also want to say, and very much tapping on what Sister was saying, that when we talk about knowledge, there are when we're in these academies, that if there are Somali people who are in the academies doing things, is that a decolonial knowledge? If you're basically, now that there are Somali people who are also able to have PhDs and they're also able to talk, and it's like, and that also that we have to perhaps have a duty to translate ourselves back to the academy. Is that particularly necessary? So I'm putting it out there. And the final point, I just want to say, I don't know if everybody's. There are people out in the world who are really theorizing what the colonial experience meant for how the world was created. And it's, without a shadow of a doubt, the conception of modernity, the conception of rationality, the conception of progress was built in that colonial encounter.
Yeah.
That happened. That is, and when and it's in that space that we can even think about sort of the modernity that we live today. So the fathers of liberalism, the fathers of modernity, they themselves, they had very clear ideas of who black people were, and actually who black people were in relation to the rest of humanity. So we can talk about, our other brothers and sisters across the world, whether it be in South Asia or in the Far East, or there were very clearly in the colonial project there were hierarchies of peoples, and in knowledge production we can see there are hierarchies of people. So perhaps when we look at how South Asia Studies is, even in SOAS, how the South Asian Studies department looks, and how the African department looks. Yeah, how easy is it to you to find an African professor for your thesis supervisor, and how easy for you is it to find a South Asian or a Chinese or wherever. And so it's the actual academy itself, because the colonialists, they came with knowledge. They came with anthropologists, they came with scientists, so even in that knowledge production, and SOAS, its history, it's like it was a place that, the British administrators, they would learn here the different languages and anthropology, so that when they took them to the colonies, they'd know how to do that. And we have, yes, there are attempts in syllabuses to try and expand it, but it's an expansion of an already myopic conception of how the world is, rather than saying, who are you to look at us? Who is it that your eyes should be able to see us? Why is it that I can't see myself? And have that type of, and have that perspective. And it's not to say that, I'm listening to myself now, and it's not to say that there isn't a conception that European knowledge isn't a knowledge either, but to say it's not the only knowledge, and that it's not objective. It comes with its own subjectivities. Unfortunately, we do not learn that, but we learn immediately that our position is tribalistic. We immediately learn that our position is not a modern position, that our traditions are that traditions. They're not ways of knowing, ways of being, cosmologies. So, and to pick up a little bit of what Sister was saying, that there are people in the world who are talking about this throughout the world, that they're looking at these issues, and it's not to say that we don't listen to them, but also know that we ourselves also have something to contribute to that. So it's not a sort of a pick off the shelf, here's a way of understanding the world and liberation, rather than saying we can produce knowledge, that we are producing. Okay, one final point. I think this conversation ultimately doesn't mean anything when we don't realise why Somali Studies is such a big thing and why there's so many Somalis in this room. Our families are dying. We live in a country that's been in consistent civil war for a long time, and that we're not here for, I know I'm not here for my own good. I'm not here for choice. Yeah? I'm not here for choice. You know, and we can think about what happened in Garissa and what's happening in Dadaab right now, and what's happening in South Africa when Somali people have been burnt alive, what's happening off the coast of Lampedusa, what's happening in Riyadh, what's happening across the world. Across the world, our people are dying, and the policies are there. Our people are being drone bombed right now. That's why we're here. That's why we're having this conversation. That's why when I see things like studies for Somaliland Journal, and people are dying, they're suffering, and we have an academy where people can make money telling other people about us, about who we are, about what we do, about our qabil, about all these things, making policies that do what exactly? And also, I have to say, there are Somalis who make money from being able to translate that as well. So, I mean, I come with like that gravitas, and to say that we're here as diaspora and we're talking, and also diaspora are a problem, in that we diaspora are a problem. You know, that this conversation in English is a problem. You know, you know, the levels of coloniality means that I can't speak in my own language anymore. I can't say everything that I want to say in my own language anymore. So,
the same was, I think, my first day was Somali. I'm Somali. I'm Somali. I was born Arab. I go there regularly once a while. لكن وحنا كصومالي أنا موجودة في الشغل. حوالي سكوات الصومال نفس Somali طبعا. هذا ساعة كمان before I came to this lecture, I had to Resurgence in SOAS. What's his name? So we need to be confident in terms of like somehow, even if it's like 4 words.
Because usually when we're a lot capable of doing great things, achieving a lot of stuff. I mean, you've seen a lot of the bios of all the people that signed to the hashtag. I think if we work together collectively, irrespective of wherever we're actually from, we can actually do a lot, good. And coming back to these academics, I'm not going to mention names, but we could easily teach them a lesson because a lot of them get funded by governments back home. So if we even lobby back Somalia and other regions, I'm not going to mention it, but I actually know 2 of them who actually receive substantial funding from the government. So if they want to get a bit political, I feel like there's people that wish
just 2 points I really wanted to touch on. The first one was the point that you made about the master student who set the journal up here. I think the question that we ask shouldn't be why was he able to set up a journal, but rather if we had set up a journal as well, because we also have the ability to do so, why would his one be taken on the more serious than anything we do? Because I think one of the main fallacies that is often promoted, not just about African, and I go back to that point you were making about we need to take it back to the African societies. It's not just Africans, but also communities in Asia and Latin America also face the same problems, basically anybody that's not European. And what you often find is, to reflect on the question, can the Somali speak, is that we are speaking, we're not being heard. So this is a key lesson we have to make. And just to introduce myself, my name is Yusuf Delia, and I'm my area of research is in the notion of progress and how knowledge, so coming from a science policy study, so this idea of how does knowledge, how does reason, how does all of these things produce. And one of the interesting things about European type of knowledge is that, and this is very much built in on the work of Latin American philosophers, is that the European perspective, or the Western perspective, is the only perspective that doesn't view itself as a perspective, it views itself as truth. Why does it view itself as truth? Because they have the ability to be able to tap into the scientific method. And because they're able to tap into the scientific method, they're able to say that their conclusions that they reach are rational, objective, and free of bias. But whereas us as African people and people of colour, historically, the way colonization has always painted us is that fundamentally we are bodies out of place in the realm of human endeavour and also human knowledge. We cannot produce things. Anything that we do is often passed off not on your superstition, culture, or luck. So part of what I teach at Sussex is the idea of innovation studies and everything like that. And it's absolutely, when you look across Africa, when you look across Latin America, it's amazing because when we talk about innovation in these contexts, it's never about how do these people invent, It's about how can we transfer technology there, how can we transfer knowledge there, and then how can we create the conditions for them to be able to better utilize this. So I think one of the key things here is that when we talk about Adon studies, a lot of people have been caught up on this notion of what it means to be Adon. And a lot of people, and going back to that point you said about the coons, I refer I choose to refer to them as those who have this in our way of thinking. Because it's very, very clear to make it clear that just because you are Somali does not necessarily mean you're pushing an agenda that is pro-Somali. Just because you are African does not necessarily mean you're pushing an agenda that is pro-African.
I mean, I'm glad to be here, and thank you to the organisers, especially the lady in York, because I really understand where she's coming from. I mean, our culture is storytelling, and as a kid I would interrogate the older people for information because I wasn't there, I grew up here. It helps to speak Somali, but I don't think it's necessary to speak on what the intervention before me just there. Anyway, my point of view, the experience of being in Mogadishu suggests to me that Somali culture is impervious to white supremacy. This idea that somebody has to validate our experience of life, I think, is a nonsense. I mean, being there, you see it. And I was there for about a year, and the city changed so fast. The people there are responsible for this change. I don't mean in politics, but just ordinary life, building buildings and businesses, and just carrying on with being a person. And when you speak to them, a taxi driver, a child, they have something to say, something of value, and that enriches my experience and gives me confidence that the colonialist period, I mean, I've always known it was superficial. Our language is intact. Things, you know, it's a rich culture, and now we live all over the world, North America, Europe, so on and so forth. And to prove this point, I would go around and see if there was any remnant of the Italian influence, and to be honest, there's not much. I made sure I filmed things. It's not easy to film over there because of, you know, there's men with guns, but as much as I could, I did this, and when I find an old Italian building like the Central Bank building, I think, oh, how cute, you know, a lovely Italian building, but much of it is gone. Funnily enough, I mean, again, this subject interests me, and the aspect of knowledge management. I mean, I've put that film up on YouTube, so I think it speaks for itself. This is a powerful culture, and people on their ground and in their language, nobody can deny that they know what they're talking about, and they're no shrinking violets. Lastly, I happened to have the late Edward Said's Orientalism with me when I was over there, and I would read it almost every night. And again think, oh, how cute, you know, because somebody somewhere in Europe documents something, complete fiction sometimes, about somebody's culture somewhere, say Syria or whatever. You know, young people are taught this in the academies of France and so on. Somalia is impervious to this. You know, anthropologists from Paris cannot walk the streets of Mogadishu, as I could as a normal civilian. So you've got to bear that in mind. Confidence comes from living that life, walking the streets, talking to other Somalis. And you know, hopefully we'll get a few of them to speak to these academics, the ones in America, I think. Thank you.